You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host and bourbon-soaked storyteller, Juliette Miranda.
Well, hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda, and welcome to episode 239 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. Today I have two scary bourbon-soaked stories for you about revisiting Clarissa and a Crazytown Halloween. But first, let's have a little bit of bourbon. Cheers, y'all. Oh, y'all, you have no idea how much I need that goddamn bourbon. This has been a hell of a week here in New Orleans, I gotta tell ya. For the sixth time this season, we have been preparing for another fucking hurricane. And I am again relieved to say that this one missed us by about 100 miles. But the preparations were so crazy, my guy and I actually had a hotel room booked in Austin just in case we needed to flee the state. So, needless to say, it's been a little wild around here. Now, I'm doing things a little bit differently for this episode. You can think of me as your Cryptkeeper, I suppose, for episode 239 here, because I am bringing back, or resurrecting if you like, two very, very old podcast stories. Because I was thinking about things this week, and I was thinking about the feeling of dread. Now, if you ask me, this is the worst of all fear-based emotions, because with dread, you don't get that adrenaline surge. All you get is creeping fear that hovers over you. And there's very little you can do to escape it because you know eventually whatever is out there is gonna catch up with you. And that is what these two stories are about. Now, my first one comes from episode 61. That's a long, long time ago, y'all, but it's about a girl named Clarissa. And I adored her character so much that she's actually become the central figure in a short horror series I'm working on. Now here you're going to hear about her origins, and let me just say, Clarissa is not all that she seems. The second story comes from episode 113, and it is about my beloved Crazytown. She and I decide to go trick-or-treating, and well, y'all know Crazytown, let's just say we end up with more tricks than we do treats. Hope y'all enjoy this deep dive into creeping dread. And remember that I will be back next Sunday with more fresh bourbon-soaked stories for y'all. Cheers. Now, a while back I mentioned to y'all that I was finally ready to get a tattoo. But I've been incredibly hesitant to get it done. Mostly because I don't have a trusted tattoo artist right now. The guy who did all of my original tattoos is no longer living in the state. So I've been on a quest to find a new tattoo parlor with somebody that I can work with to get my design just right. It's a little bit of a frightening experience for me because I had kind of a scary experience at a piercing parlor a long time ago. And I'm going to give you fair warning right now, folks, because the story I'm about to tell is going to get a little bit graphic. Now, this was after I had gotten one of my first tattoos, and I wanted to do something else, but I wasn't settled on a tattoo, so I thought a piercing was the perfect way to go. And I knew exactly what I wanted. It was something of an unconventional piercing, but it's one that to this day I think is absolutely stunning. It's called a microdermal anchor piercing. And essentially, it's a floating piercing. So the distinction is that it doesn't have a point of entry and exit. It's actually just a single piercing that's anchored into your skin. So my idea was to get a chest piercing or a sternum piercing, which is kind of like right at the center where the V-neck of a shirt falls. I wanted to get a single amethyst jewel right there, so it would be a floating jewel because I don't wear a lot of jewelry. So this seemed like just a really feminine, delicate thing to do. And I did tons of research. I researched everything I possibly could about this procedure. How it's done, the tools that are used, care for it, rejection rate, all of it. So I knew everything. And I found a studio near where I lived that did this type of piercing because at the time it was a little bit more unusual, but I felt confident that I'd found a great place to do it. And I showed up one night, ready and just pumping with adrenaline to get this thing done. Now, I deliberately showed up on a weeknight when I thought that the place was going to be at least less crowded than normal. But when I walked into the studio, it was dead quiet. There was no music on, there were no people in there, and I actually thought it might be closed. So I kind of call out, I say, "Hello, anybody here?" And it takes a couple of seconds, but out from the back walks a gorgeous woman. I mean, stunningly beautiful woman. Tall, long blonde hair, and perfect. But not just perfect in her figure, I'm talking perfect in her mannerisms and in the way that she was dressed. And here's the thing, she was wearing all white. So I saw her and I thought that she might be the manager of the parlor because tattoo artists typically don't dress in white. Piercers definitely don't. But she introduces herself, says her name is Clarissa, and says that she's the only one working there that night. And she seems incredibly happy to see me, so I'm thinking, all right, maybe she was bored. Maybe she wanted a little bit of company. Well, she leads me over to the jewelry case, and I explain what kind of piercing I want, and it turns out it's one that she's familiar with. But there's something about her that just seems a little different. She has no piercings herself. She has no tattoos herself. She is pristine. So although I feel comfortable with her skills, I still feel a little awkward in my own skin around her. So I pick out a jewel. It is a gorgeous amethyst. And she walks me over to a mirror so that she can mark where the piercing will go. And she takes her marker and she just draws the smallest little point where it'll go. And she says, "I think that'll be perfect." And I look and I agree. I think it's the perfect location for a piercing, but I'm starting to have second thoughts. And she can see this. She's like, "Why don't you just sit in the chair and breathe and get comfortable, and then we can see if you're feeling up to this." It was a genius move on her part because as I'm sitting there in the chair, I start to feel a little silly. I have no reason to feel uncomfortable around this woman. She's perfectly intelligent about what she's doing. She hasn't actually done or said anything inappropriate. And as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, I gotta get this done. Because I am an incredibly impulsive person when it comes to very specific things. When I get it in my head that I'm going to do something, I will do it at any cost. Despite the fact that in this particular instance, it meant allowing a complete and total stranger to modify my body. But I was in. I was ready to go for it, so I tell her this, and she looks incredibly pleased. And she's looking at me with these icy sort of blue eyes, and she says, "I will talk you through every step of the procedure." Well, she starts taking out all of her tools, and she's demonstrating to me that they are all fresh and new tools. And she's holding them up and identifying each one, thinking that this is going to make me feel better about the experience. So she holds up one package and she goes, "This is the dermal punch. This is my elevating tool. These are my forceps. Here's your jewelry. It's all clean and out of new packaging." And then she says, "I'll be right back. I'm going to go get my apron and then we'll get things started." Well, when she comes back, she is wearing a white latex apron. So I look at her and I say, "Why white? I don't think I've ever seen anybody wearing anything like that who's done this type of procedure." And she says, "Oh, I just prefer white. Black is just way too gloomy and you can't see anything." That seems like an odd response, but whatever. At this point, I'm in. I'm committed. And I'm not going to let something odd like an apron sway my decision now. She reaches out and she pinches the skin around where the piercing is going to go with her thumb and index finger. And just the expression on her face gave me the distinct impression that she was seriously annoyed by the fact that she had to wear gloves. I mean, almost as if they were denying her some sort of sensation that she desperately wanted to experience. And she's talking to me the whole time. She's saying, "Just breathe in and breathe out. Take it easy. Breathe in and breathe out." And she's watching my breathing grow deeper and deeper. And at the top of my next exhale, Clarissa forced a dermal punch directly through my skin. Now, a dermal punch essentially removes a small chunk of flesh. And to do that, you have to twist this thing around. And she's twisting it slowly and with deliberate force, circling that cold metal tool around to slice into my subcutaneous tissue and remove a circle of flesh. And the whole time I'm laying back on this chair and I'm gripping the sides of it. Now she's wearing a mask, but I can see by her eyes that she is smiling. And she's still got the punch in my flesh, and she reaches over to grab some gauze and begins sopping up the pooling of blood from the gape in my chest. And it is at that exact moment when I believe with all of my being that something is not right with Clarissa. I wanted to bolt. I didn't care that I had a tool stuck in my chest. I wanted to get out of that chair and run. But her hands are on me now, and she's sopping up this blood, and before I can convince myself to move, she's got forceps, and she's sliding the foot of an elevating tool into my flesh to make a little pocket for the anchor. Now she's working this thing under the layers of my skin. It's dead quiet in this room. There's no music playing. There's nobody else talking. So the only thing I can hear is the sounds of my flesh separating around her metal tools. I can see her eyeing the gash that she's created. And then she's got her forceps back and she is pushing the anchor base of the jewelry into my skin, making sure that the long and short ends are positioned just right. She's pushing it, and she's holding it in place then, and with this elaborate display of coordination, she's threading a jewel into the anchor to finish my piercing. Well, it takes me a minute, but then I realize that the procedure is over, and I start to feel a little bit silly for my earlier panic as she holds a mirror out to me. I can see that the piercing she's done is absolutely perfect. Quite honestly, I half expected to look up and find her with a mouthful of my bloody gauze. But she doesn't do that. She only busies herself with writing me out a receipt and collecting my payment, and she's suggesting that I sit back and relax while she finishes cleaning. She says, "You know, these piercings can be very traumatic on a person. Really, just sit back." So I do, and I watch her. She moves around the room to dispose of the mess and organize her small chest of tools. And she's pulling out certain things, and I'm looking at them, and I see one thing that looks a little odd. So I ask her what it is, and she says, "Oh, that's a cauterizing pen. It's something that I could use to scar someone." Well, that takes me aback a little bit, and I say, "Ooh, scarring." I go, "Is that something that you've done before?" And she says no, but I'd never done a piercing like yours before either. But I knew I'd be good at it. I don't know if she was kidding. I don't know if she thought that would make me laugh. But I'll tell you, it got me out of that shop faster than you can imagine. I hopped off of her chair, hightailed it out of there, and prayed I would never see Clarissa again. You know, for as much as I love Halloween, it does make me just the slightest bit sad how holidays change as we grow up, particularly where Halloween is concerned. I think there's a certain mood to seasons like Halloween that are just hard to recapture when you're an adult. Sure, we watch It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, and dress up for parties and visit haunted houses, and it's always fun. And mind you, I'm not saying I haven't had some wonderful Halloween celebrations as an adult. But there's a certain sense of, I guess it's fear that's missing. I mean, that was the best part about going out trick-or-treating as a kid, particularly in the 80s. Everything looked and felt different. There was always just the hint of a possibility that maybe something was lurking in the dark. Could have been the old man who lived in the creepy house down the road. Maybe it was a ghost. You just accepted that on Halloween, anything was possible. And that was delightfully terrifying. It's only fitting, then, that my last great Halloween experience was shared with perhaps the scariest girl I've ever known, Crazytown. She, too, was delightfully terrifying, though more in a year-round, potentially land-you-in-jail kind of way. But even with all of her wild notions and bad decisions, Crazytown was a little bit of a romantic. Perhaps not as morbidly romantic as I am, But she was a girl who still had her first teddy bear propped up on her dresser and who could get just a bit teary-eyed over Jane Austen. So one October during our college years, when I complained to her that I missed trick-or-treating, Crazytown did not hesitate in suggesting that we go. I have to admit, I was kind of hoping she would. I usually filtered all of my random impulses from Crazytown because I knew full well that she could latch on to the most asinine whim like a tick. That was just how Crazytown worked. There were no bad ideas as far as this girl was concerned. That time, though, my Halloween nostalgia overrode my reserve. The future was looming, and I was young enough to believe that graduating from college meant I'd have to start acting like an adult. I wasn't quite ready for that, and if there was anyone who would be up for indulging in childish behavior, I knew it would be Crazytown. Trick-or-treating seemed simple and innocent enough. I mean, for starters, we would be close to home, and there were no musicians involved. Two things which I presumed greatly reduced our trouble quotient. It would just be the two of us, dressed as a French maid and a Western saloon girl, going door to door after dark. What could possibly go wrong? Had you asked me that at the start of the night, I would have been certain that nothing could stop us. It was the single most glorious Halloween Eve I have ever experienced. The air was crisp with just the slightest hint of smoke. Vivid red and yellow leaves still clung to the trees, and they would occasionally rustle as the wind kicked in. It was everything Halloween should be. We were wandering through the neighborhood near Crazytown's parents' house. It was an old, old neighborhood lined with an uncommon collection of Victorian mansions, dated brownstones, and sprawling Frank Lloyd Wright estates. We strolled up and down the dark sidewalks, arm in arm, laughing at the costumes we saw and giggling over the stunned expression of parents answering the door to us two college girls who could easily give new meaning to the phrase trick or treat. It was moments like this when I really adored my girlfriend. I loved that she would shamelessly dig her hand into a candy bowl and grab fistfuls of her favorite chocolates where I'd only take one or two. So Crazytown was the perfect companion for about 5 blocks or so. That was how long her romantic side lasted before being completely usurped by her manic one. I could tell she was starting to get a little bit twitchy when she started flirting with the dads who would open the door to us. And I knew it was probably in both of our interests if we started walking back toward her parents' house. She had no interest in going back, however, and insisted we keep walking. It was just such a beautiful night, she said, and she was having so much fun. And y'all, again, I was a little relieved. Honestly, I was having too much fun to want it to end. So we just kept walking. We turned up a new street and found our way down another one or two, stopping every so often to trick or treat, until we came across the house. Every neighborhood has one. It's that giant, hulking house on the one corner without a streetlight. This house was especially ominous. The yard was overrun with leaves and dying bushes. Half of the windows had blackout curtains. The others had holy screens patched with duct tape and garbage bags. A gutted Mustang festered on the far end of the driveway, and a collection of rusty skateboards and broken sports equipment sat on the porch. There was no denying it. This house was haunted. But not by any ghosts. No, no, no. This house was haunted by frat boys. A couple faded Greek letters that had been spray-painted onto the tree stump in the center of the yard clued us in. And that was a sight that scared me far more than any trio of 6s ever could. Leave it to my crazy girlfriend to find the one unregulated frat house in town. Let's go ring the doorbell. I look at Crazytown. All of my warm feelings toward her vanish and are replaced by immediate annoyance. No way. No fucking way, I say. That house looked like trouble, and I wanted no part of it. Besides, before we left, I had extracted a promise from Crazytown that we would not attend any parties that night. Trick-or-treating, that's it, and I intended to hold her to it. But that damn Crazytown was anything but an idiot, and she could always counter any argument I had. She looks at me and she asks, "Do you see any parties?" And I had to admit she had me. The house was completely still. She's looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to say something. So she just sighs and says, "Well, you can stand here and wait for me if you want, but I'm going to go ring that doorbell and get me some candy." Crazytown turns and flounces her way up the sidewalk to the front door, her ridiculous ruffled skirt bouncing up and down with every step. Ugh, fuck. We'd played this game more times than I cared to remember, and there was no way to win. The last time I tried to stand my ground with her, I wound up spending 4 hours alone at a truck stop while she chased down some random guy in a Corvette. No way was I going to let that happen this time. I met up with her on the porch, just as she punched the doorbell. It didn't exactly work, but it warbled out enough noise to bring 3 truly unfortunate guys to the door. They were drunk and in the middle of some hot mess of a half-assed all-guys Halloween celebration. One dude was wearing a devil tail, one had on a stained football jersey, and the third was wearing an orange wig. Ugh. Trick or treat. Well, they ogle the 2 little treats who have conveniently landed on their doorstep and slur out a very poor attempt at a greeting. I do my best to give them the stink eye, but that damn Crazytown is flirting it up as if she really believed something good was going to come out of this. Not surprisingly, those guys were all out of candy, but well-stocked in beer and other so-called treats. Crazytown gives me her best pouty face, but I am not having it. Sorry, y'all. No candy, no deal. I grab Crazytown by the sleeve and drag her away. They call after us as we mince our way down the driveway, and Crazytown lets loose a few whines about just wanting to score some beer. But I can tell she's only mildly annoyed. Had the guys been better looking, well, there's no doubt that then at least one of us would have been propped up on a beer keg. Fortunately, Crazytown declares that her feet hurt, and we both decide it's time to head home. Except that neither one of us can remember exactly which direction home is. An hour ago, the sidewalks had been full of kids and lined with well-lit houses. But trick-or-treat hours had ended, leaving the neighborhood dark and quiet, with only Crazytown and I arguing in hushed voices about which way to head. Remember, these are pre-cell phone days, so the only thing we had to rely on was the position of the fucking moon and our rather shaky sense of direction. We walk toward a line of houses that appear vaguely familiar, and I am ridiculously conscious of how we look. When surrounded by other people in equally wild get-ups, our costumes seemed risque but cute. After dark, walking alone, I started to feel a little bit like a pheasant during hunting season. The block we're on hits a dead end, and we're forced to double back. Even Crazytown seems a little bit unnerved as we make our way down a different street. We're both silent as we walk, clutching our bags of candy, high heels clicking indecently on the sidewalk. And then there's a noise. It catches my attention because it's a shuffling sort of sound, like leaves being moved. It's quick and rustling and short-lived, so I write it off as someone's pet and keep moving. But then I hear it again, and I grab Crazytown's hand. "Did you hear that?" Well, she had. So we both pause and listen, but of course it doesn't happen again. So it has to be an animal, right? Crazytown and I reassure each other that it's probably nothing and continue walking. hoping that something, a tree, a street sign, whatever, will spark recognition in one of us about our whereabouts. Damn these old suburban towns. They're full of winding streets and malfunctioning lights. And the houses are set so far back from the road, it's impossible to get your bearings. We're both starting to panic just a little bit. And it doesn't help that those rustling sounds keep trailing behind us in erratic bursts. They always seem to stop just before I'm set to turn around. And then, as I begin to think that maybe I imagined them, I'll hear it. That same dragging, lumbering, shuffling sort of sound inching closer and closer to our stupid stiletto heels. Crazytown grips my hand and points ahead. There are 2 stone lions sitting at the foot of a very long driveway. Their shadows seem to waver a little bit in the moonlight, and we both ease just a little bit. We'd passed them earlier in the night, so thankfully that could only mean that we had to be heading in the right direction. So we had that going for us. But the odd shuffling continued, and now it's accompanied by muffled breathing. Y'all, this was not some guy out walking his dog. This was not good. Fear grips the pit of my stomach, and I start to run through my mental self-defense checklist. The first rule in self-defense is to know your surroundings. Actually, technically speaking, the first rule of self-defense is to not put yourself in bad situations. But I blew that out of the water years ago when I allowed myself to become attached to Crazytown. I was trying to build up my confidence a little bit, but looking around, I didn't see a whole lot to go on. Although we knew better where we were heading, we still had several blocks to go before we were on our own turf. There was very little light on the road, and countless dark corners. And neither one of us was exactly armed, unless you counted our stiletto heels, which for both of us would require elaborate unlacing and buckling to remove. We did have 2 rather large sacks of candy, but what the hell were we going to do with those? Pelt our potential murderers with mini Snickers bars? In short, we were fucked. I lean over to Crazytown and whisper, "We're being followed." And she whispers back, "Oh, I know." And she sounds completely casual about it, as if she has known all along and is now dropping a trail of M&Ms behind us to make it easier for our attackers to find us. I tell her I think we should run for it. And now she looks at me as if I'm the crazy one and says, "I have a better idea." I'm hoping she's going to suggest knocking on someone's door and having them call us a cab. But that, y'all, is definitely not Crazytown's style. Instead, she stops walking, whips around, and calls out to our invisible stalker and says, "Enough of the shit! Get out here and talk to us like a real fucking man." I'm too stunned to move. In my self-defense class, we were taught to attack first only as a last resort. Heckling your murderer was definitely not recommended. When Crazytown starts tapping her foot and yells out, "We're waiting, asshole!" There's more shuffling. I hear voices, muffled laughter, and a thud. Then steps. A guy walks out from behind a row of hedges. 2 other guys appear next to him, and I realize it's the drunken frat boys. The thought didn't exactly comfort me, but I follow Crazytown as she stalks up to them. The apparent leader of this gang is still wearing his orange wig. He lights a cigarette and leers at us, revealing a row of crooked upper teeth. He looks bigger than I remembered from his doorway. I do my best to conceal my fear, but it is very hard to look like a badass when you're wearing a French maid costume. Crazytown, however, has no such problem. She looks at him and asks, "Just what the fuck are you supposed to be?" He takes another drag and says, "I'm a clown, baby. A dirty fucking clown." His friends chuckle and inch a little bit closer to us. Well, I'm bracing myself now, and I am anticipating that something horrible is going to happen. I didn't know if they were going to jump us or what, but I was terrified. Crazytown, however, does not look impressed. She walks up to Orange Wig Guy and grabs the cigarette right out of his mouth. A trail of smoke lingers between us and them. She takes a quick puff and blows more smoke in his direction. "Oh, right, a clown," she says, dripping with sarcasm. Well, buddy, clowns don't smoke. They burn. Crazytown then flicks the lit cigarette right into the guy's wild orange wig. Those synthetic fibers may as well have been kindling. And as the first lick of fire curled from the clown's head, Crazytown nudges me and she yells, "Now we run." She and I took off down the street, running as fast as we can on our heels. The guys are yelling in the background. Neighbors begin turning on lights and threatening to call the cops. But Crazytown and I are long gone. We slow down when the voices have faded into the background and sit on a curb to catch our breath and take off our heels. Somehow, in our mad dash, we'd both managed to hang on to our candy bags, and Crazytown reaches into hers to pull out a Kit Kat. She breaks off half and hands it over to me, brushing a tangle of my hair off my face as she does. Her blue eyes reflect just a little bit of the moonlight when she smiles at me and says, "Happy Halloween, girlie." Y'all, it's true that holidays like Halloween do change as we grow up, which is, I suppose, for the best. But that doesn't change the fact that every so often when I see that full bright moon on a crisp Halloween Eve, I can't help but wish I could go trick-or-treating again. Only this time, I'd do it in sensible shoes. And now, y'all, I am raising up my glass and wishing you a very happy Halloween.
Go to theunwritablrant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter @MorningNeurosis.
Girl, you as pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, a couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away. Let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton relay. Hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo. Sweetest taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this.